Another episode of Relational Leadership where we try to bring you leadership tips that fit for your life. This is a terrible intro. Sorry, guys.
You have all week to get this
I
one thing
know,
right,
I
Stephanie. Come
know,
on.
so it's when I try to script it that I struggle. But no, we try to bring you some leadership tips that just fit into all the different segments of your life, whether you are leading small groups or large groups. You'll find tidbits of information that will help you in your daily life. My name is Stephanie Clements.
And my name is Shawn Dawley. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about what we can do as leaders, or even people that are not in leadership capacities, to help influence the people around us. That word influence, influencer gets thrown out quite a bit. And as much as I would love to be one of the Kardashians that gets paid $1 million to push some new foundation to my $40 million adoring fans, that's not the type of influencing we're talking about today, though we may touch on how social media does have a prominent role to play, even for us leaders. But what is it we can do so that we don't have too often to go into the bottom of the barrel and simply pull out, because I told you so? When it comes to that, it means you've exhausted all other
Right.
tools. And so let's talk today about influence. So, Stephanie, what do you think?
Well, when I reached out to you and I told you, what do you think about talking about being an influencer? You were immediately, like everybody, social media influencer, because that's what we think of now when
Yeah.
you think of it, is social media influencer. And really, it still is the same concept because it's just a different tool. It's just ways, but an influencer is somebody who impacts the lives of
Yeah.
those around them.
Yep.
And in the, before technology, it required that you actually had to be in the personal space of that person,
Right.
Well, even if you didn't meet them, you saw somebody speak, you did, they at least knew who you were in a personal space.
Mm-hmm.
Then of course TV came along, and so as long as you paid enough to get on TV or had become ranked enough to get on TV, you could influence people that you never were in the same space as.
That's right.
But social media allows us to truly influence people all across the world.
Yeah. And, to your point, like when we've gone through that evolution, at first it was only a pretty select few that could leverage the power of television.
Right.
Well, now through the democratization of technology, you've got 16-year-old kids putting out TikTok videos, and now you've got legions of them doing it, but a few actually, they get some traction.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, they've got 30,000, 40,000 followers, and they
Or
put
millions.
stuff out. Right. And
I know that's hard
you
for you to
scratch your
believe.
head,
Yeah.
like, how, what now, what is it that this, whereas it was pretty obvious, say 40 years ago when Michael Jordan signed his first Air Jordan shoe deal with Nike. Okay, well, this is a recognizable figure at the top of one of the major professional sports leagues. But now you've got people that are organically growing this influential following. So again, yeah, we're obviously already talking about the social media aspects of influence, but more broadly,
yeah, I
what
mean,
do you think in the workplace?
Yeah, and you can't get away from that because influencing now, it does happen a lot online.
Mm-hmm.
But, whether you have sworn off social media, whether you are on it 24/7, we all have a sphere of influence.
Yeah.
So those that influence us and those that we influence. So unless you're a hermit and really just never come out of your house, live in the woods, you're probably being influenced somewhere by somebody,
Yeah.
as well as you are doing that. I remember this whenever I was in high school, and I went to a pretty small school. So, it had kindergarten through 12th grade at the same location. I remember it was one of the teacher's kids, and there was a group, 3 or 4 of them that were playing, and they ran over to me and my friends and they were telling us how they always play and act like us. And one of them says, "I'm always you when we play," and this
Okay.
and it
Yeah.
was a very, I mean, that was the first time that I ever all of a sudden felt, "Oh my gosh, I'm actually influencing somebody.
Yeah.
I have to be
Yeah.
careful what I'm doing
Sure.
because somebody is watching
Yeah.
and replaying things that
Yeah.
they see or the narrative that they know." So that was the first time that all of a sudden it just kind of hit me that I need to be cautious because and be responsible
Yeah.
in how I act because somebody is. I am
Yeah.
influencing somebody. And a lot of times we don't realize and we may never know everybody that we
Oh,
impact for
sure.
sure,
Sure. Sure. And then on the flip side, there's been people that were influential in your life who, if even for just a moment, made a pretty indelible impression
Oh,
on you, and
absolutely.
they have no idea. They have no idea that they had set some example on some day in one scenario that forever sort of like slightly revectored the arc of your life. And so, no, I think that's a great insight that one way or the other, people are watching,
Yeah.
and it does become, it can really hit you like the weight of responsibility when suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, like somebody is emulating something that I am doing.
Right.
Okay, I now feel the obligation to maybe conduct myself a little bit differently. So yeah, and I get it. And you said you were how old when that happened?
I was in high school. I was probably 15 or
Okay, sorry.
16,
So you were a young
so
adult, so to speak.
yeah.
Yeah,
But you're, a teenager. So you're being, you're usually pretty self absorbed. You're into you and your friends.
yeah,
You're not really
sure,
thinking about your actions outside of the
yeah,
gratification or whatever, that it
yeah,
brings. So it was eye opening. But as I started looking up, and really, studying things on influence
hmm,
and um, there's we have a lot of influencers throughout our lives and
yeah,
obviously the ones who do walk in a room and people gravitate to and they're
yeah,
drawn to, those
yeah,
are the obvious ones, that we may have in our own world that you can go, "Oh, yep, I know that person."
yeah,
And, they just light up the room.
hmm,
And, and then unfortunately, on the negative side of influence is that somebody can walk in the room and
yeah.
it
It's
dims the
right.
mood of the
Yeah,
room.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Their presence is known one way or the other.
Right.
Like there's the person that can walk into a prison riot and within minutes they've calmed the entire room down. And
Yeah.
there's other people that can walk in to a elderly woman's Bible study and within 5 minutes the place is in an
Right.
uproar.
They're all
So
arguing.
like yeah,
Right.
so there are people, and I love the juxtaposition that I threw out, like an obvious example being Michael Jordan with his shoe deal. And then you threw out the example of like you on the playground. And one thing that I was a little bit late to figure out as a leader was it's easy for us to sit back and think, well, one day when I have all of this power, all of this authority, all of this status, then I can start influencing people. But how many fifth grade basketball players week would be made when they're out with their family at dinner and one of the varsity high school players comes over and says, "Oh, you go to my school. How's it
Yeah.
going?" I mean, I would guess what I would politely ask everybody to consider is don't minimize how much power of influence you probably do have. Because if we're waiting, like, well, I will only begin to try to influence people when I'm at the top, well, you may never get there.
Right.
But
Right.
along the way, there's so many opportunities that we do have, to be somewhat of an influence in people's lives. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so then you can choose. I mean, hopefully you choose to be a positive influencer.
Yeah.
Um, so I
Yeah.
asked I asked even online before we started today, ideas of how people are influencing.
Yeah.
And one of the statements was that, basically this person, when they see people, tries to give a really positive, upbeat statement to them and encourage them. And so those little things go a long way. Um, and somebody, 90 out of 100 people may not remember what he said to them because they weren't in the place to receive it or they weren't, but somebody will take that. And I mean, he is using that as his way to influence people.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you can get people just with those little statements, and they're an encourager, and they do those things that all of a sudden you're always going to remember
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. I mean, there's people in our lives that after just a 10-minute conversation with them, you feel somewhat depleted because they're just so draining.
Yeah.
They've got a complaint about everything. And I'm not minimizing when somebody, and you ask them, how's it going? And they say, not real good. My mother's dementia is accelerating. Hey, man, that's not complaining. I asked
That's
you a
just
question
yeah.
and you gave me an honest answer. That's not who I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about the people that we all know that we have in our lives who every time you get with them, like after like 10 minutes, they've held court and bashed everybody in your all's common sphere of influence. They've complained about this, they've whined about that. And then there's those other people that you think, man, every time I have a conversation with this man or woman, I feel a little more hopeful, optimistic, and I got more of a pep in my step, right?
That's right.
And then people tend to gravitate towards people like that.
So absolutely. So, we've known common influencers, whether we agree with them or not. Politicians are absolutely influencers because they get a following.
Sure.
They get people who do align with them. If they didn't, they wouldn't stay in the public for very long.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
At some point you got to win an election, right?
and then you get those people who aren't running for office. They're not doing, but they are passionate about a cause.
Yeah.
And, they are determined to make a change for things. And so, those are influencers. They change the world around us.
Yes.
And, whether we do a small amount or whether we do a large amount depends on what our passion and our desires are. And I've got some steps that people can take if you decide that, no, I'm going to take on the world, or, I just want to do my daily stuff,
sure.
but hopefully not negatively impact anybody.
Yeah. And, the first few jobs I had in the Air Force, I was not in a position of formal leadership, right? So I was the chief of weapons and tactics. So my job was to stay abreast of all the current and evolving threats that were out there and the appropriate countermaneuvers, and then try to propagate that info and intel to the squadron. Then I was the chief of training, and similar role where I'm in an administrative position. I'm still a card-carrying pilot, but I've got responsibilities and not necessarily commensurate authority. So I've got the responsibility to push information and help people develop, but I didn't have any carrots or sticks.
Right.
So I had to develop, these skills of influence. Well, then when I became a formal leader, meaning like I've got the title, I can find myself on the org chart, there's clear chains of command and things like that. What I found was, the influential abilities that I had to develop because they weren't innate, rather than just simply leading by decree, if I just continue to exercise the same influential approaches, I'm more likely to, engender sustainable, momentum, as opposed to the second I walk out of the room, like, okay, he's gone. Now let's go back to doing it the way we wanted to do.
Right. Well, some common or some notable figures that, because I kind of looked up, some of the top influential people in the world in the last probably 100 years.
Okay.
Actually less than 100, but number one was Mahatma Gandhi. And so, that really was just his beliefs and religious leader, but a lot of people, and he changed a lot. And then you have Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela as all, so these were not necessarily, again, political figures or necessarily, I mean, it changed politics and things like that. But having a cause and a passion, and they did it without social media.
Right.
And it
Yeah.
had, so it really had to be that
Yeah. Yeah.
grassroots
Yeah. Yeah.
effort to spread when they
Sure.
had that,
Sure.
because they had to speak and get followers who then continued to get those people.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, so we have so much more ability now. Um, and and yet I feel like fewer strong voices that really unite and bring us together and create passion like that.
Yeah. Well, the underbelly of that aforementioned democratization of technology is that once upon a time, you had to really think deeply about coming up with a cohesive, unifying message. Like if you were passionately committed to something that you believed in your heart of hearts to be true, and you felt like it had value for everybody, you really had to think through, what to say, how to say it, but why am I saying this? Well, now through factionalization, hey, in a country of 330 million Americans, I can probably find a million people who agree with me and me alone, and I could go down to the stovepipe,
Mhm.
fraction sliver of society and beat my chest and scream it from the rooftops and get this narrow but deep
Right.
following. And so I cannot help but think that some of the fractionalization
Yeah.
of technology has just made it possible for people to be deeply influential, but with a narrower number of people.
Right.
And we could even see that in the workplace. If you've got 100 people, it would be tempting to only listen to the 10 cheerleaders that are constantly telling you, boss, you're
Right.
right, you're right, you're
Right.
right, you're right. That could be the case. But in the workplace, we don't have that luxury of compartmentalizing ourselves and only leading a tenth of our organization. We got to lead everybody.
Sure.
So how do we then, develop the message and the delivery, to be
Yeah.
influential, to that bigger group?
Well, some ways to be influential as far as, if you wanna go and you have a passion and you want to just really get things out there, and whether that is locally, regionally, nationally,
Hmm.
internationally, um, the biggest thing that I see without, I mean, not just mascara and whatever, but, it requires you really knowing what you wanna do. So,
Yeah.
we can all, I mean, any of you can sign up to be an Amazon influencer, whatever. That doesn't require you to have product knowledge. You just have to try it on, show it off, whatever.
Yep.
That's not the type of influence. But when you are really bringing your own product or cause or whatever to the public, then, you really have to be prepared. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to, have that passion about it and know, if I bring a widget and that's what I want to sell, I need to know that it works. I need to know
Yeah.
how it works. I need to be able to explain that to the public. And so if I get questions and somebody says, well, does it do this and this? And I go, I don't know. You're just, you're going to lose that credibility.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We don't expect everybody to know everything about everything, but to really cut through the noise and to be influential, whatever your little niche is, you need to be the subject matter expert in the room. Now, there
Right.
can be other people but who know it as equally well. But you really, if you want to corner the market and be influential about even
Hmm.
just one thing, the people in this day and age where they can just click off of your video, click away from your homepage on your website, they want to know that there's a reason for them to spend their finite, precious time listening to you.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people they go at it with real zeal, but maybe they figure out, okay, I've only got about 10 seconds of material here, and then
Yeah.
people are going to
Right.
figure me out.
So the next thing is, in today's world, you have to have an online presence. Usually means a website, um, getting things out there because people want to go verify who you are. They want to be able to look up, based on your product, based on your service, whatever. They want to be able to know and go and look and see. So having a website, getting reviews, things like that, people rely on those things. So that's step number 2 to having that influence. I got to know where to find you also.
Yeah, it's a bit counterintuitive, but in this era, if you do not exist virtually, you're
Right.
not a real person.
Right.
It's like it's backwards.
It is,
but
it is
if,
true.
If it's almost like you can meet somebody in person at a networking event, and then the next day they're like, well, I can't find him on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn. He must not be real. That must have been a figment of my imagination, because if they don't live online somewhere, they must be a figment of my imagination.
So I laugh because one of the very first people I met here in Louisville, and I'm not going to protect the innocent. I'll just say, his name's Bill Johnson. So very generic name. I say this to him all the time.
No, it is. It's not Shawn Dawley.
Yeah, it's not, so very generic name. He told me what he did for work and whatever. So I went to go look him up, could not find him anywhere. And he had called a couple months later about something and left a message. And so then I called back. His voicemail wasn't set up. It was just the generic. And I'm like, this guy is so not real. I mean, he is not.
Is he in the witness relocation program?
Right. Well, he did introduce me to about the first 100 people I met here. And turns out he's real. But I was
Stephanie, do you see Bill Johnson here right now?
Right. Yeah. He's sitting right there. Right. But, he didn't have that online presence anywhere, and I couldn't find him. So I couldn't verify that anything he said, as far as I was concerned, was true. Yeah. So it does require some online presence, at least, the website. At the very least, I would tell you to have a LinkedIn, where at least it is more business. But, the next thing is increasing the engagement that you get. And so we're going a little bit here into, technology, but with your website, you need blogs, you need things that continue to show you as the expert also, so that when people go to search it, hopefully they're landing on your page, things like that. So having those kind of things, because these are all steps to whether you want to be a public speaker, as Shawn does, or, you offer services. You still need to be the expert in it, and they need to be able to find and see the types of things that you have knowledge of.
Yeah.
Getting involved. So some of this is networking. Some of it's being part of your organizations that support, whether, some of these associations where they may have to lobby for your industry or whatever. You need to get in there and know the other leaders of this, of your arena.
Yeah. And so, like, for people who are listening, who may be hearing some of these great ideas Stephanie is giving, you're thinking, oh, none of that appeals to me. I'm with you. Like, Stephanie knows me. Like, I do not like doing social media. I'm not against people who do. I'm just saying I'm not personally drawn to it, but it is necessary. It's the professional equivalent of eating vegetables. I don't love to do it, but as a responsible adult, can't get around it. Going to networking, I've shared that with you, before. I mean, it's draining. I don't look forward to it. And again, it's not a reflection of the people that are there. It's just the way I'm wired.
Right.
Doesn't incline me to do it. But hey, life is about choices. If I want to do what I'm trying to do, there's no way to get around not putting out, so to speak, content, not putting yourself. I mean, it's called network, not net fun. I've used that quote before. But no, these are all great ideas that if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, that sounds horrible. Hey, I'm on your team. I really am. But it's the world in which we live.
It is, so There are many times I've been like, "Ugh, I'm gonna take a social media break," and I can do that for a short period of time, but marketing and connecting with people are just key to what I do. So take your break, take a step back, but then you got to jump back in and keep content out there. If you don't enjoy it, you can hire companies
That's
that
right.
do it for
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
and, create engagement and, they do that. The key is having the presence.
Yeah. And
So,
so I'll, maybe offer up something that worked for me when I first started doing this. Um, it wasn't that long ago that I made my very first post. This was a seminal moment in the life of Shawn Dawley, right? And I then did what I had preached people not to do since I had heard about this thing called Facebook. I hit post, and then for about every 5 minutes, I'm looking, okay, 3 thumbs up, 6 thumbs up, 12 thumbs up. Oh, I got a heart. Oh, somebody's clapping. And I basically monitored results about every 5 minutes for the next
yeah,
12 hours. Okay, now what I know to do is post. And then at the end of the day, around 4 o'clock, I'll circle back and I'll check it. And if somebody's made a thoughtful comment, I'll engage with that.
right.
But I had to really discipline myself to compartmentalize the posting and the follow up.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it was just insidiously permeating my entire day. Like
yeah,
I'm constantly like bouncing between working on an Excel sheet, checking Facebook, working on a Word document, checking LinkedIn, working
yeah.
on a PowerPoint presentation, checking, this. So I had to basically
Well,
force
yeah, you
myself
do.
to do it responsibly.
So, and that's where I do think, even more so, social media influencers, you know, you can get very, very wrapped up in what kind of responses you're getting. And those are immediate, I mean, it's more of an instant gratification
Oh,
or a immediate letdown. So, um,
the
you,
neuroscientists have conclusively proven that the moment we hit post, there's a release of dopamine, which is the
uh,
pleasure seeking neurotransmitter. And then every time we get the heart, the thumbs up, or the comment that says, "Girl, you rock," the serotonin neurotransmitter flows in. So,
uh-huh,
like neuroanatomically, the masterminds at these social media companies, they didn't design these things on accident.
right.
Like they had neuroscientists that were part of the algorithm process to figure out how do we create these social media platforms to, I'll say it, addict us
Yep.
to the app.
Yep.
And I will have that argument with anybody that wants to tell me that these platforms are not deliberately engineered to suck us in, keep
I
us
think there's
there,
a
and monetize us
there's
as
a
products.
documentary on that, I believe.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of the people who were at ground zero, like I would never let my kids on this stuff. Like these
Yeah.
are some of the architects. Like, oh man,
Right.
don't ever let your kids on that stuff.
Yeah. So, yeah, I actually read that it's the equivalent to the feeling of cocaine.
Well, I wouldn't know.
I wouldn't either, but that's
I've heard
according
that
to them.
before,
Yeah.
and that's a powerful indictment, really. But
Yes. But obviously it's addictive, so somebody liked it.
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But those are the social media is now because a lot of people don't even watch the news. They get their news even from social media.
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
you know, back in the day, you look to see who made Time Magazine's Man of the Year or Person of the
Yeah,
Year,
right.
right? And they still do that, but we actually see that on social media. We don't go run out to the
I can't
newsstand to,
tell you the last time I was in a dentist office and saw a Time magazine sitting on
right,
the counter. I'm
right.
sure they still exist, but yeah.
Well, they evidently do because uh, Volodymyr Zelensky,
Oh yeah.
yeah, he was 2022 Time
Okay.
Person of the Year.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr
Yes.
Zelensky. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So it still exists, but now social media tends to be our way if we are really making headway into the national
Yeah.
or in that arena or I mean really again even regionally.
Yeah.
that tends to be the way that they get there.
Yeah. I mean, I was at a function recently with local sports journalists, Eric Crawford and Rick Bozich. And, those guys, they've been covering sports in the Louisville market
Yeah.
since I was a little kid. And I remember when I had a paper route, now 13, 14 years old, so that was like 35 years ago, they would always drop the big brick of papers at the corner, and I would walk down there in the dark, and I had a flashlight with me, and then I would go do my route. But I would always, once I, use my knife to cut open the plastic straps that kept that big block of papers all together, I would quickly like rifle through and see, like in the sports page, that game that Kentucky had the night before that tipped off at 9 o'clock, in Mississippi against Mississippi State. Like, okay, now I get to see what happened. Whereas in this day and age, I'd wake up, pull out my iPhone 14 that, I complain about because the other kid has an iPhone 15, and I would just look up on whatever the platform is, and I would see like instantly, right? And I just see the box score. So yeah, I mean, I think we're stating the absolute obvious, but I would challenge people to consider, look, these social media fads aren't going away.
Right.
I think the internet's here to stay. How can you leverage it in a way that's sustainable to you, that can help you with your ability to influence people, because we all got to figure our way through this, and what works for you may not work for me,
Right.
or what works for me may not be something you just want to do. So what you kind of figure that out on your own. But I think that we're stuck with this for the foreseeable future.
And hopefully, the thought that I would really like to leave you with is, you may post things and, I even find myself occasionally just posting something, even though it's out there for anybody to see. It's not that I care whether you like it or not. I want it to show back up in my memories. It's because social media and things like that have become a photo album for us now.
Yeah.
And so I want to I want it to show back up and things like that. But realizing that we really don't know all the people that we influence and that who watch, I have a large following. The majority of them don't necessarily interact. I don't even know that they see anything. I don't know if they get on social media. I don't know. And then I'll see somebody who I haven't seen or talked to or anything, in 5 or 6 years. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, I follow everything you do." And I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize,"
Yeah, that's right. That is right.
And, we don't know who we're going to influence. And to take time and think about that, you are an influencer. Your sphere may be smaller than, some, but you're an influencer. And to take responsibility with that and know that, the things that you say, the things you put out there, somebody may take and run with it.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
so, think about whether that's something that you want people to run with, the thought of the day, whatever, you're doing.
Yeah.
Is it something you want to embody, people to embody? Or is it something that you're like, "Oh, I didn't know somebody was actually going to take that serious."
Yeah. And some people will, they got no problem routinely bearing their soul and putting all their dirty laundry out.
Yep.
And then at the other extreme, there's the people, and you know them, they highly curate the select aspects of their life to make it look like they have been touched every day by the hand of God.
Yeah.
And you only see them with their pedicured feet propped up with the sunset in the background saying, hashtag blessed, another great day at the Ritz-Carlton. I mean, that's not real life either, right? And so again, it's not my place to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't post. I would just challenge you, don't feel like because other people are putting stuff out there in one way, that's the way you got to do it. Whatever you're comfortable with.
So we are at the end of our time, but I challenge you to go out and be a positive influence in your world. And if you enjoyed any of our content, I would ask then that you share it and subscribe because we are on Spotify and Apple and Audible.
Audible.
So go subscribe. Also, YouTube. You can go subscribe there. So we would appreciate any support that you give us. And we appreciate your time that you joined us today. And hope that you all have a great week.
Yep. And if anybody ever has any specific topics that you would like Steffi and I to talk about in a future episode, feel free to let us know that as well, because if it's important to you, it'll become important to us. So I will see
Absolutely.
you guys next week as well. Thanks.
Bye.